Hi friends, thanks so much for joining us tonight as we finish this semester's faculty seminars through the Sorin Fellows program. Rooted in the scholarly ethos of the Nicola Center, these monthly seminars, facilitated by the most exceptional faculty at Notre Dame and beyond, are intended to engage and inform you, our Sorin Fellows, about enduring and contemporary topics surrounding and informed by the Catholic moral and intellectual tradition. The inspiration for this event is twofold. First, we anticipate that your educational experience at Notre Dame, St. Mary's College, or Holy Cross College will be rigorous and nourishing, no matter if you are an undergraduate, graduate, or professional student. However, we believe there are some things so important to an authentically Catholic educational experience that every student, no matter their course of study or professional goals, should not only be exposed to them, but also have a familiarity and appreciation of them, be it with respect to public bioethics, education policy, St. Thomas Aquinas, and more. And at the same time, and in the interdisciplinary spirit of the Center, we recognize that the requirements of your degree program may preclude you from dedicating a semester to the study of these enduring themes or contemporary issues through a class or even several classes. Leveraging the Center's robust network of excellent faculty on campus and beyond, these faculty seminars are formulated in an effort to allow you the opportunity to build an introductory familiarity, as well as to chart a course forward with the topic through additional resources. Again, like most of our programming this semester, these seminars would best take place in person in a classroom in DBART, OSHAG, or the law school, which we plan on moving forward once our shared life together regains some normalcy. But in the interim, we will host these over Zoom, which will allow you to access and revisit this content at your own leisure, whether in your dorm room or on a walk around campus. The format of these conversations will be as follows. Our guest will lecture for about 30 minutes, providing a high-level but substantive treatment of the seminar's topic. Then we'll be joined live via Zoom webinar by our guest so he or she can field questions from Sorin Fellows that arose out of the seminar. And that'll run for about 20 minutes or so. With that said, it's my pleasure to briefly introduce our guest this evening. Duncan G. Stroik is a practicing architect, author, and professor of architecture at the University of Notre Dame. Widely considered to be one of the world's leading scholars in sacred architecture and the classical tradition, Professor Stroik's areas of expertise and scholarship are too voluminous to note here, but include architectural history and theory, classical architecture, Italian art history, Renaissance and the Baroque, residential design, sacred architecture, and 20th century architecture and design. His portfolio includes numerous churches and church renovations, as well as educational, commercial, and residential projects. His award-winning work includes the Our Lady of the Most Holy Trinity Chapel in Santa Paula, California, the Shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and the Cathedral of St. Joseph in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Professor Stroik is a graduate of the University of Virginia, where he earned his bachelor's degree, as well as the Yale University School of Architecture, where he earned his master's in architecture as well. In 1990, Professor Stroik founded an architecture firm, of which he currently serves as director here in South Bend. And Professor Stroik has also founded the Sacred Architecture Journal, an initiative of the Institute for Sacred Architecture. In addition to his academic work teaching architecture courses here at Notre Dame and advising graduate students, Professor Stroik published in 2012 a seminal book in the field of sacred architecture titled The Church Building as Sacred Place: Beauty, Transcendence, and the Eternal. His awards and appointments are too numerous to note, so in the spirit of brevity and concision, I will only offer two. In 2016, he was awarded the prestigious Arthur Ross Award for Architecture, and in 2019, he was appointed to the U.S. Commission of Fine Arts for a 4-year term. Professor Stroik has long been a friend of the Nicola Center for Ethics and Culture, having presented at its annual fall conference and even having been interviewed on the Center's wildly popular podcast, Ethics and Culture Cast. And we're delighted to welcome him back, albeit virtually, live tonight to present his seminar and to participate in a question and answer. As has been the case throughout the semester in these faculty seminars, please submit questions for Professor Stroik through the chat function, and we'll get to as many as we can during the question and answer session. Friends, please join me in welcoming Professor Duncan G. Stroik.
It's great to have you. Great to talk about sacred architecture this last week of school. It's been an eventful couple of weeks. We have finals coming up. We have the Clemson game. And we have November, All Saints, All Souls Day. Am I missing something? Did something else happen? I forget. But I'm here tonight to talk about sacred architecture, and there have also been things happening in the realm of sacred architecture that I'd like to bring to your attention. You probably know a little bit about it, and I'd like to offer some thoughts on it, as well as maybe some ideas for moving forward, because unfortunately, it's not all so good. So this is an image of maybe some of you. Did anybody know about this recent fire? It's way down south.
Is this in Chile?
Very good. Yeah, this is two churches that were recently fired by arsons in Chile, and we'll talk about that later, but by groups of people protesting, and destroyed two Catholic churches in Chile. It's the most recent and most kind of shocking thing. Unfortunately, this isn't a novel problem. And but I think at the one hand, it's some things that we should be concerned about and even worried about. But I think it also shines some light on why would you try to burn down a Catholic church, or why would you try to destroy statues? So that's what I'd like to talk with you all about tonight, to ask that question. Do you know this church? Anybody know this church?
This is the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception.
Excellent. So this is our largest, the Immaculate Conception. Yep. So this is our largest Catholic cathedral in the country, and in Washington, D.C. It's not a cathedral, but it's the largest Catholic church, and actually holds 10,000 people, 6,000 on the main nave and 4,000 in the crypt. I show this image because this, again, if this place is packed, it seats 6,000, because it brings up this other problem about churches, because many of us in this country and around the world have been away from our churches this year. Why is that? This pandemic, which in spite of that, some of us have gone back to college, and I hope you all are glad to have been here. I'm glad you came. Some of us are glad to have taught you. But in fact, the churches, many of the churches have been closed or have been limited in their allowance of people coming to them. Are any of you all from places where the churches are still locked down in the U.S.? Does anybody give me a state or a country in the world where they're still locked down, locking people out of churches for mass, that is? Okay, that's good. Well, our brethren in the Holy Land, in Ireland, are presently locked down. It's been a very bad year in Ireland. Ireland used to be considered a Catholic country, but the government has made it very difficult to go to mass, even more difficult than in the US, which has never been known as a Catholic country. And they're fighting it right now. In fact, there's a Notre Dame law student whose father is involved in fighting it in their Supreme Court to reopen the churches. That's kind of shocking. So at any rate, a lot of us have been away from churches this year because maybe we weren't allowed to. So there's this whole kind of question about how important are churches? Do we want to be in churches? What do they do for us? And does that have anything to do with why we might burn them down? Now, why did I show you this image of the Immaculate Conception? Because this was just a couple of weeks ago. The shrine celebrated 100 years from the cornerstone blessing, and this is all the people that made it. Isn't that crazy? This is a 100-year anniversary of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, paid for by Catholics from around the country. DC government allowed 100 people in a church that seats 6,000. So we've got a number of issues here that are a problem. Number of things that are apropos today in November, All Saints, All Souls. Actually, this young man, does anybody know this young man from Barcelona? Recently beatified. I won't say it correctly, but it's Blessed Joan Roig y Diggle. And he was your age. He was 19. He was a martyr. And it was a time when the Spanish Civil War in the 30s, there was a great outpouring of hatred towards Catholics. 7,000 priests, monks, and nuns were executed, martyred, 7,000 in, again, what we think of as a Catholic country, Spain. These are kind of shocking photos during and after, and then a photo today of one of the great churches still in ruins. And they destroyed tens of churches. Hundreds. Thousands of Catholic churches were destroyed in Spain in the 30s. Isn't that incredible? Thousands by armed groups and anti-Catholic, anti-church, anti-religious groups. This is not the first time in the history of the world this has happened, but it's pretty shocking. And the reason I bring it up again is because of Blessed Ioan, who his job was to catechize, to protect the churches, and most importantly, to protect the Blessed Sacrament. The churches and the priests were under a lot of persecution, and the priests would be killed or shot. And so he was actually given the Blessed Sacrament like a previous saint and asked to go and deliver it to the faithful who couldn't make it to church, who weren't allowed to go to church. One night he was in his room with the Blessed Sacrament. He had a great devotion, and the police came for him. The police came for him, and he knew something was up. He consumed the Blessed Sacrament. He was brought by them away and shot by a firing squad. So here's a man your age who died on this day, today, trying to protect the Blessed Sacrament, trying to defend the church, trying to defend the churches. And I think they're connected. That's a question. Are they connected? Defending the church, big C, is it related to defending the church, small c? This is a horrific example that the whole world noticed and was shocked by last year. Do you know what I'm talking about? What is this?
The burning of Notre Dame.
Yeah, Notre Dame, they call it. They have a funny accent over there. They call it Notre Dame. And of course, horrific fire that woke a lot of us up, a lot of French up, actually, to the importance of a building. Sometimes we don't appreciate things and people until they're hurt or gone. And it came with a great outpouring of love for this building, which is an icon of Paris, but also an icon of France, and clearly an icon of Catholicism and of faith and what it means to be a sacred building. So now, is this related to other acts of terrorism, to war, to the World Trade Center, to a violence against regimes, a violence against people? There's a whole history of this in our world. And intentional or unintentional destruction of buildings. Is this related? And we don't know about Notre Dame. The French experts have said no, it's an electrical fire. But some of the, let's say, the experts in the architecture world of Notre Dame believe that that's a questionable idea. Anyway, we don't know. But the destruction is one thing. The conscious destruction of a symbol of a government or the symbol of a economic regime here, it does a number of things to us. It's meant to incite fear. It's meant to destroy and to hurt and to maim. And part of it is that the buildings are connected. Destroying the buildings is connected to destroying or hurting or maiming the people or the institution. And that's what I'd like to talk with you about today. So with this destruction of churches and statues that we've been witnessing this year, and it has happened before, and it's been going on over the last, it's been happening, and it's been happening certainly in the last couple of years, but it's been a pretty bad year for the Catholic Church and for the Catholic Church's buildings and statues. So here I'm trying to talk about mainly conscious acts of violence. So here's this beautiful church in Santiago. Santa Maria Asuncion, and the other one is San Francisco de Borja, and in Chile, and destroyed by a group who are unhappy and supposedly against the government, so they destroy Catholic churches. Here's some images of the violent, the Vandals is an old word from ancient Rome, the Vandals. And this is kind of a shocking one. It seems taking pleasure in the destruction of a beautiful building, and something that took a lot of effort, time, and money to build by our forebears. And some people, presumably young, could feel they could just had the right to destroy it. So why is this? Why is this happening? Do you know this one? Also France.
It's in Nice.
Very close. It's another N word. It's a nice cathedral, but it's not in Nice. That was a joke. Nantes Cathedral, N-A-N-T-E-S, Nantes. And this was an arson, actually by someone who worked in the church, shockingly. And you see this amazing photo on the left of this fire coming out of the stone building, right? Stone is supposed to be fireproof. Well, it's not. And this horrific fire in this St. Peter and Paul, knockout little gem, probably a cathedral that we don't think about a lot because there's too many beautiful cathedrals in France. And this is what he did to the beautiful pipe organ, knockout pipe organ. And of course, if it hadn't been stopped, it would have done even greater damage. So an arson in Nantes, there have been, I think, 28 arsons or murders at churches in France over the last year or two. This is Sicily. Some criminals came in to rob and steal, and at the same time decided to destroy. And part of their destruction was a conscious destruction of the Blessed Sacrament and the tabernacle there on the left. So there is a conscious desire to do something to that, because some of us believe that's actually the body and blood of Christ. So in order to send a message, perhaps we do this destruction and what Catholics consider actually is a sacrilege. This is not just destruction or material suffering, but this is actually sacrilege, and it's an attack on the religion, but more importantly on God himself. So anyway, so a variety of things around the world. I'm just showing you, just a little snapshot. And then in our own country, the fellow in Florida that drove his car into the church, into the narthex, and set it on fire, and said he was angry at the church. So he decided to destroy the building. In general, I don't think these people are angry at the buildings. Maybe I'm wrong, but they're angry at the church, big C, or they're angry at people, or they're angry at this or that. And so they attacked the building, the small c church, which makes sense. If the church building is something worthy and sacred, it makes sense. If the building is just a functional structure, it doesn't make sense to attack the building, right? Because it doesn't symbolize anything. This is in El Paso, Texas. Beautiful high altar with the namesake of our church, and great statue in front of the main building, and the destruction of the Sacred Heart. Somebody went to a lot of trouble to destroy a statue. So why commit violence against a statue, the main statue, the image of the Redeemer in a church? Why would you do that? Probably to send a message, probably to shock or just to give fear. We don't know about this church if it was arson, but it's part of the summer violence against Catholic churches or against statues in this country. Does anybody know this one in California? It's one of the missions, named after the angel. St. Gabriel, San Gabriel. So this is San Gabriel mission, 250 years old, founded by Junipero Serra. We don't know if this was a arson or some other kind of accidental event. We often like to blame these things on electrical fires until we know. This happened in June or July, and we still don't know the answer to this, which is shocking to me. But there have been a lot of other, things happening since then that I guess have distracted us. Anyway, this is a nice church, a classic California mission, and destroyed by fire, and it's just totally gone on the outside and inside. In a sense, a mini Notre Dame Cathedral, right? A mini conflagration like Notre Dame. Very sad, and of course affects a lot of people who go to church there, who live there, who have an affection for the building, the place, the statues. So I think all of this brings up a number of issues about our church buildings, and I'm going to propose that these kind of shocking events, fires and destruction, and also murder of and martyrdom of people, priests and nuns and others, exhumation and destruction of bodies. It's interesting. There's a history of destruction of saintly people. If there's someone buried in an abbey in England or in a church in Paris, one of the things the marauders like to do is destroy the saint's body, the bones. So there's this very visceral need to destroy a religion that you believe is presumably false or wrong. So you destroy things to prevent others from having some kind of devotion or even taking joy in it. Anyway, this is another timely church. Anybody know the feast day today? One of the feast days today, Saint Martin de Tours. This is a Saint Martin de Tours in Paris, in France. And I propose that all of this destruction shows us something important and even good about our churches. That first of all, they're symbols. Second of all, they're places of worship of God. They inspire hope. The buildings and the artwork inspires hope. And fourth, the building itself and the elements within it are an image of God and an image of the body of Christ. So those are the things that I believe this destruction shows us. If the church weren't these things, it would be less attractive to destroy these buildings. Does that make sense? So let's look at these for a minute. Anybody know this one? This is the church where this is a church that actually was founded by a very famous English thinker and cardinal, and was recently canonized.
Is this the Birmingham Oratory?
Excellent. And who was the saint who helped found it?
John Newman.
Excellent. Very good. Idea of a university. And bequeathed us a nice little building in the Holy Land of Ireland in Dublin to use. So here's St. John Newman's church that he built in Birmingham, and an event. So the idea that the building itself is a symbol of the sacred. It's symbolic of eternity, of the saints, of heaven and earth touching down. Even this, the outside of the great cathedral in New York, rising up with two spires. Today, it's even smaller than other functional office buildings, and yet it still expresses in the city, in Gotham, the idea of the sacred. The church as a place of worship, the Blessed Sacrament, the Mass, a place where we gather, and that's another reason to attack our buildings, because they're places of worship where Christians gather and receive strength and receive community and fellowship. They inspire hope. And I think that was very clear. You see the large number of people witnessing the conflagration at Notre Dame in Paris and being shocked by it. Why would all these people gather around and look at a church? Because it's being destroyed. This was not a day of happiness for them. This was a day of sadness, whether they're Catholic, Protestant, agnostic, or otherwise. And Parisians saw that the building itself inspires hope, and the idea that the building and its artwork is representational of the image of God and the body of Christ. The idea that in Catholicism we believe that the body is good, that God created the body for good, and that he deigned to make it clear that we were created in his likeness by actually becoming one of us, by the incarnation, God becoming man, that God could actually also be man, to give the human form the greatest dignity it could ever bear. And the beauty of Christ's, the Son, Christ the King, on the beauty of his mother, who is also the church, and the sadness of the Pietà, and yet the beauty of the one who was willing to bear his body and die for all of us. So the body of Christ, the image of God. And we see that also represented in a great church. Recently, we had this feast day in November. Did anybody catch it? The feast day. This is one of, I think, 2 or 3 feast days, international universal feast days of the Catholic Church that are dedicated to buildings. Do you know this building?
It's St. John Lateran in Rome.
Good. The Mater et Caput, the cathedral built by Constantine and added to over 2,000 years, the Cathedral of Rome. You see the cathedra, you see the seat of the bishop in the apse. Anyway, this church is full of the images of God and of his body, of his saints. You see on the right and the left, the saints, 2 of the apostles, images above them from the Old and New Testament. John the Baptist up here, John the Evangelist, that's the original name for the church. One of the original names, the heads of the 2 great founders of Rome, the new Romulus and Remus, Peter and Paul, images of the saints and the crucifixion. So the church building is full of images, and the image is good, the image is holy. And again, all these good things that we see in these buildings, or all these things that I think these buildings express, are also the reasons that people want to destroy them. They wouldn't want to destroy these buildings, burn them down, destroy statues, and so on, if there wasn't, that's my argument, if there wasn't something possibly true to these buildings and these images, there's no need to tear them down. Nobody's arguing that they're torn down because they're ugly or they're uncomfortable or the roof leaks, right? They decide to make the roof leak to make a statement about the religion, the faith, and the institution of the church. So why would you tear these buildings down or destroy this artwork if they didn't have some meaning? So those are 4 ideas about what the church, what we can learn about church art and architecture from this attack, this modern attack on buildings. And so that's it, right? Let's just leave it at that. No, let's think of ways that we can or that we have responded in the past. How have Catholics, how have people of goodwill responded to acts of violence? We protect the buildings, we repair, really, we reparate the buildings, we restore the buildings, and we rebuild them. So first of all, we protect the buildings because the buildings are places that we believe are necessary for faith, for religion, for the practice of religion, and so we protect them. And the buildings also, by being there, also help to protect our God-given rights of freedom of religion. We protect them by honoring them, by beautifying them. We protect them, this is World War I, by sandbagging them. We cover them up in World War I so that if other powers, other people try to destroy them, they are protected. We create a shield for them. This is Notre Dame in Paris. And then this is Amiens, an even taller cathedral in France. Isn't that amazing? World War II, worried about bombing of the Luftwaffe and others. And so we protect the building. How do we protect the building? How do we protect the art? What does it mean to reparate? If there is a destruction of a statue, painting, pulling down, disfiguring, an act of violence, what do? We try to bring peace and love. Here's Archbishop Cordileone of San Francisco, who has prayed at 2 statues of Junipero Serra that were destroyed or hurt in his archdiocese, and he called these acts of violence, of evilness, and they needed exorcism. That's the common way the church deals with disfigurement or defilement of Catholic elements, Catholic buildings, Catholic artwork, is you have an exorcism of the place. And so he led the faithful in an exorcism to reparate, to make reparation for these evil acts. This is Notre Dame in Paris, a number of decades after the French Revolution, when the statues on the outside, the altars on the inside were destroyed, when other things were torn down. And then in the center, look at right at the center, there's a missing flesh, a missing tower, a little tower there. That was destroyed right around the time of the French Revolution and never rebuilt. So how do we restore a great building? So it took Viollet-le-Duc, who's been in the news lately in the 1840s to the 1870s, to rebuild Notre Dame. And he actually rebuilt it better than it was. The flesh, this tower in the middle, is bigger and better than what it had been in the 18th century. He added the 12 apostles at their feet, all those wonderful gargoyles. People ask me, what's the symbolism of gargoyles? All these wonderful gargoyles, they're just a really expensive way to get water off the roof, right? No, but Viollet loved gargoyles, so he added, hundreds of gargoyles to this building that were never there. So we restore the building, sometimes even bigger and better than it was. These are some designs for new chapels that are meant to fit with the building, but are new creations of Viollet, new Gothic creations, new artwork, new stained glass to reflect the beauty of this building, what it had been before destruction and also modification. So this is all being done actually right around the time that a small college in Indiana was being formed. And so here you see it today. Sorry, here you see it before the recent terrible work with the beautiful spire, and Viollet rebuilt some buttresses and strengthened things and fixed stained glass and fixed rose windows. And we don't see it, but on the front facade, there's hundreds of statues of Old Testament kings and queens, all redone. Again, that was the French Revolution said, off with their heads, kill the statues, destroy the king, destroy the nobility, and then it was everybody else. So violence towards buildings and violence towards people. Okay, we're coming to an end, Duncan. So we restore, here's Notre Dame after the conflagration. Here's a mass being said after the building is, in a sense, condemned. And they're all wearing these aren't those football helmets? They're just the wrong color, I think. Notre Dame should be gold helmets, right? And this is a recent veneration of the crown of thorns and they're planning to rebuild Notre Dame the way it was. The people spoke and they wanted to rebuild it. This is Frauenkirche in Dresden, which the Allies, I don't know who that is, but the Allies destroyed in World War II. And the Germans, it was a symbol of Dresden, and the Germans beautifully restored it about 10 years ago, rebuilt the whole thing. Look at that. So we rebuild. One of the ways we do is protect the building, we restore the buildings, but we also rebuild. And this building was almost totally rebuilt from scratch. The dark stones are original stones, as best they can make out. They're all burnt and dirty and burnt. And the light stones are all modern stones, all cut for the building. And so it's a new building, reconstruction, rebuilt, like as best they could the way it was. Beautiful job. In fact, one of my colleagues, Krupali Krushi, worked on this project as a grad student. And then another famous destruction by the leader of a major power. Do you know what this is? This is one of the churches, the Cathedral of Moscow, that the Joseph Stalin destroyed, 1931. Destroyed this amazing cathedral and ended up using this spot as a swimming pool. And after the end of communism in Russia, we say, the Russians have rebuilt it. Isn't that wonderful? Now this is hard to do because we don't have exactly what it looked like. We have photographs, maybe we have a few drawings, but there's a lot of research that has to be done, and then there's a lot of decisions that have to be made by the artists, the architects. The artwork would have to be based on the old works, but it would have to be new creations. The carving of the stone, this is all marble, just amazing building to tear it down in 1931 and rebuild it just about 5 or 10 years ago. So let me end with this image of our beloved buildings on God Quad, and both of whom have been rebuilt, one from a fire and the other the church. If you think about the log chapel being the first chapel on campus, it's the third. And so we protect, we restore, we rebuild, and we reparate. And so that's a few thoughts on sacred architecture and what we can learn from the dangers today and what we might do to prevent more from happening. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Stroik. We've had several questions come in, and I encourage Sorin fellows to kind of type them into that chat box, and we'll get to them for sure. The first one comes in from Tommy Phillip. Tommy, if you're still on the call, go for it, as a question about kind of stone churches.
So I was wondering how a stone church could burn down.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tommy. Generally, we think of stone buildings and concrete buildings as being impervious to fire. It's not really true. They are a pretty good prevention of fire. And one of the reasons that cathedrals and other important buildings have been built out of stone historically, sometimes brick as well, masonry, is that they would do a better job against fire. And fire has been the great enemy of architecture for thousands of years. We think we've got it under control because of modern technology with fire alarms and also sprinkler systems, which can do really good work. But historically, we did have a lot of fires in our buildings. Stone. One of the things that happened at Notre Dame, I think generally, let's talk about Notre Dame just for a minute. At Notre Dame, the fire was up in the attic, up in the wood, very thick wood, very big beams, and it caused an amazing heat. And that fire led to you saw the photo, the conflagration of the tower, the fleche, they call it, F-L-E-C-H-E, the fleche. We have one at the South Dining Hall, actually. And the fleche and which was mainly wood and copper. Anyway, it got so hot that it burns down, but then it's really the weight of that tower falling onto the roof that destroys part of the roof, and then that goes through into the stone. But the fire weakens the stone, and especially it weakens the little bit of stuff that goes between the stones, which is the mortar. And so it could weaken that mortar and make that very sloppy and very pasty and so that now you have stones with kind of holes around them or joints around them and nothing holding them together. So you can have damage that way. But Notre Dame, most of what happened was the tower falling in. But the other buildings I showed you in Chile and the Spanish Revolution, those are mainly the product of fires. And the fire wouldn't be burning the stone, but it'd be burning other stuff. And then that heat can affect the stone. So it's not really burning. It's not because stone is easy to catch on fire. It's more that other things burn and then weaken the stone. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome, fantastic. Lucas just submitted a question. Lucas, go for it.
Yeah, hi. Professor Stroik, as an architecture student myself, and you as obviously a well-known architect and professor, how would we go about approaching a change design process in the wake of all these terrorist attacks and all these attacks on the faith through the physical world? How do you think we should kind of restructure churches to help protect them from attacks without sacrificing their aesthetic beauty?
That's a great point. Well, I don't know what the simple answer is. If we are just building churches in general, it is worth building them well for centuries out of good materials and making them, let's say, again, it's a bad word, fireproof. So that's one step we can take that can help us. But in terms of thinking about buildings that might be attacked or might be a cause for attacks or violence, unfortunately, we have to use those other means of architecture, perhaps of walls and gates and other things that help to define and keep us safe. And we may have to do that for buildings to make the buildings more safe. Modern people, we like to use cameras and video cams, and we maybe used to have the police, but I think one of the things that Blessed Joan of Barcelona teaches us is that there was a whole movement among young people at the time to actually, the churches were being attacked, and these young people would actually, and the priests would actually go and try to prevent the attacks, try to stand there and prevent people from attacking them, and of course that could mean bodily harm. So it gets kind of scary. So those are just some initial thoughts. I don't really have a blueprint for that, but I think we should begin thinking about ways to protect these buildings. I've been arguing for a while now that that churches and civic buildings, even federal buildings, should be permanent buildings. We should not be building glass buildings or impermanent buildings, because they're much more easy to destroy. Some of us like the transparency or the views or the light, but it's really kind of crazy in the 21st century with what we've seen this year to have federal buildings that are glass that I can go with a hammer or a mallet and just destroy and walk right in. So buildings have always been about security. They've always, that's one of the things they do. It's not what we like to emphasize, but right now maybe it's a time to think more about security here more than in the last 30 years. We were thinking about it in other countries. We were worried about security in the Middle East or whatever. Maybe today we have to think about it on our own shore. And of course, we want to protect people. That's the most important thing. We want to protect people.
Thank you very much. Alec, one of our law fellows, has a question about gargoyles. He goes, what is the theological significance of these gargoyles mounted onto these churches? If there's a deeper theological meaning than just fancy gutters.
Well, there's always somebody who asks this question, the gargoyle question. One answer is the gargoyles are the sublime, the vices, the natural vices of humanity that are in the world, and so we represent them on the outside of the buildings. We tend not to represent them on the inside. So that's one idea, that they're representing the vices and the evil of the world, and we acknowledge that, that it's there, that there are evil spirits. And there's a whole tradition of that, actually. You'll find in various medieval churches, they will put the 7 deadly sins, or images of what someone thought the 7 deadly sins were, on the pavement as you walk into a church, or over the front door. There's a Dominican church in California that has that from the 30s, so that you leave them behind or that you trample on them. So there can be different interpretations. So that's the positive spin on gargoyles. The more pedestrian spin on gargoyles is that Viollet-le-Duc, who put them on Notre Dame and then other buildings, and then that led to it became in style to put gargoyles on new and old buildings. He liked them, and he was not a Orthodox Christian. He was, let's say, an agnostic. And what he really was interested in was this sublimity and these kind of dark ideas. And even though he did his work mainly for Catholic churches, he was actually working for the secular government. So it was really his way of making Notre Dame more fantastical and more medieval than it ever was. People say the Dark Ages. He loved that idea of the Dark Ages, not the Dark Ages, but the medieval. He was trying to bring out the medieval that was never there, that the medievals never would have done, or hardly would have done. So that's the other side of gargoyles at Notre Dame. There's a whole book on it, actually, that's very interesting in the last 5 years, on the gargoyles of Notre Dame, the meaning of Viollet-le-Duc, of other people, of photographers that captured people's imagination, and then the fact that really they're a 19th century invention, essentially invention. There's stuff before him, but he added hundreds or thousands of them to Notre Dame that had never been there.
Thank you very much,
Professor. Yeah, thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Nicholas Holmes, you're up with your question about the French government's restoration efforts.
Hello, thank you so much, Professor Stroik. I was just wondering if you could comment on what your opinion is of kind of the success of the French government's efforts to restore Notre Dame so far. How do you think that's been going, and how successful you think that they will be in kind of restoring Notre Dame to its former grandeur?
Yes. Well, I'm very optimistic. One thing that we do not think of in this country, we have old buildings. We think, a log building or a wood building or some brick building from 400 years ago is really old. That's a modern building in France. 400 years old is a modern building. That's modern architecture in France or Italy or Germany. And these countries have a great culture of restoration and rebuilding. And they've been doing it on either buildings from Roman times or early Christian times or here in medieval times for hundreds of years. So craftsmanship is still there. Now it's expensive, and they use it for these really special buildings. You don't build new buildings like Notre Dame today in France. We could probably in America more likely than the French. We would be more likely to build new buildings like Notre Dame here in the US than they would ever. But they have the technology, the old technology, and the craftsmanship. So they have schools of craftsmen. They have schools of people that are specialists just in the wood trusses and the wood beams on the roof, which was a very complex medieval design, actually unique. And one of the debates was, do we rebuild it with steel and concrete, which is what all the architects want to do always, or do we rebuild it the way it was? It's been around more or less for 800 years. We could rebuild it and keep it going for another 800 years with the hope that there's no fires. So they have groups just committed to truss work and woodwork, and it's very exciting. And so we're going to see these people come together at a very high level, on a very prominent level at Notre Dame. They've been working all over France doing great stuff, and the Italians are doing wonderful things, and the Spanish, and all around Europe they're doing this. But here we're going to see it on something the whole world could see. So I think it could actually help a revival of interest in preservation, in rebuilding, and in craftsmanship, which we need both for the old buildings and for new buildings. I personally, as an architect today, I want craftsmanship. I want handmade, I want hand-carved stone, hand-carved wood. I want artists who actually make the sculptures. I don't want it to be made on the computer, as fun and as easy as it is. I don't want it the easy way. I want it the beautiful way. And so I think we're going to see some very positive things come out of this catastrophe. And thank goodness to the French for speaking to their president, who didn't want to rebuild it the way it was, right? He wanted to put a swimming pool up there because there's not enough swimming pools in Paris, or, maybe a hotel or a nice coffee bar because there's not enough restaurants in Paris. So he wanted to do other things there. And the French people spoke pretty clearly over a number of months and said, no, we want it to rebuild. And then the architect, Philippe Villeneuve, who's a great hero, he said early on, no, it must be rebuilt. And he got a lot of flack for that because he's politically appointed there. And he's winning out. And he's a man who loves and knows this building. So if anybody can rebuild their church properly, they will. It'll be done beautifully, carefully, and that doesn't mean we can't debate some of the finer points that they do, and that's fine. But it's going to be an amazing work, and I think something that we in America will be inspired by. And again, we're the ones who will probably build a new church like Notre Dame in 5 years, and we could use it. Thanks so much, guys.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Professor Stroik, for joining us. Friends, join me in thanking digitally Professor Stroik. And on the eve of finals, I think your line about you don't want it done the easy way, you want it done the beautiful way. So friends, as you prepare for finals, it may not be the easy way, but do it the beautiful way. So have a good night, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pete.
Thank you.
Great job.